The map on the wall was covered in pins, red for advancing armies, black for collapsing fronts. In the dim, suffocating bunker beneath Berlin, a man who once commanded continents now stared at a reality he refused to accept. The war was lost, but how did it come to this? How did a regime that once seemed unstoppable crumble so completely? To understand how Hitler lost World War II, you have to rewind to the moment when everything still looked like victory. In the early years, Germany's rise was terrifyingly swift. Poland fell in weeks. France, a nation many believed impenetrable, collapsed in just over a month. The German war machine, Blitzkrieg, was fast, precise, and devastating. Tanks rolled like thunder across Europe, supported by aircraft that screened death from above. It wasn't just strategy. It was shock. Entire nations were paralyzed before they could react. But hidden inside this early success was the first seed of defeat, overconfidence. Hitler began to believe he was not just a leader, but a military genius greater than his generals. Victories reinforced his instinct to trust himself above all others. He started making increasingly bold and increasingly reckless decisions. One of the first major turning points came in 1941. Against the advice of many of his commanders, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. It was the largest military operation in history. Millions of soldiers, thousands of tanks, and endless supply lines stretched across vast territories. At first, it worked. Soviet forces were caught off guard, entire armies were surrounded and destroyed. German troops advanced hundreds of miles into Soviet territory. It seemed like another quick victory. But Russia is not France. It is vast, brutal, and unforgiving. The deeper the Germans pushed, the longer their supply lines became. Fuel, ammunition, food, everything had to travel enormous distances. Roads turned to mud in the autumn rains. Vehicles broke down, horses died, soldiers grew exhausted, and then came the winter. German troops had been told the campaign would be over before winter. They weren't equipped for freezing temperatures. As the cold tightened its grip, engines froze, weapons jammed, and men suffered frostbite. Meanwhile, Soviet forces, used to the harsh climate, regrouped and counterattacked. The Battle of Moscow marked the first major failure. The German advance stalled. For the first time, the illusion of invincibility cracked. But Hitler didn't learn. Instead, he doubled down. In 1942, he shifted his focus south toward the oil fields of the Caucasus. Oil was the lifeblood of modern war, and Germany was running short. But instead of concentrating his forces, Hitler split them, sending one group toward the oil fields and another toward the city of Stalingrad. That decision would become one of the most catastrophic mistakes in military history. Stalingrad wasn't just another city. It bore the name of Stalin himself. Its symbolic importance made it a target Hitler couldn't ignore. What began as a strategic objective turned into an obsession. Street by street, building by building, the battle dragged on. German forces captured most of the city, but Soviet troops refused to surrender. They fought from ruins, from basements, from the shadows. The city became a graveyard. Then, in November 1942, the Soviets launched a massive counteroffensive. Instead of attacking the heavily defended German troops inside the city, they struck the weaker forces guarding their flanks. Within days, the German Sixth Army was surrounded. Hitler refused to allow them to retreat. He promised supplies would be flown in. He ordered them to hold their ground at all costs. But the airlift failed. Food ran out. Ammunition dwindled. Winter returned, merciless as ever. By February 1943, what remained of the Sixth Army surrendered. It was more than a defeat. It was a turning point. The myth of German invincibility shattered completely. From that moment on, Germany was on the defensive. While the Eastern Front consumed massive resources, another threat was building in the West. Britain had survived the Blitz. The United States had entered the war after Pearl Harbor. Industrial power on an unimaginable scale was now aligned against Germany. Factories in America churned out planes, tanks, and ships at a rate Germany simply could not match. Every loss Germany suffered was harder to replace. Every battle drained resources that couldn't be replenished. Meanwhile, the Allies began bombing German cities relentlessly. Factories, railways, and infrastructure were targeted. Civilians suffered. Production slowed. The war machine began to falter. Yet Hitler still believed in victory. He interfered constantly in military decisions, often with disastrous results. He forbade retreats, even when they were the only logical option. Entire armies were sacrificed because he refused to give ground. Generals who disagreed were dismissed or ignored. Strategic flexibility, essential in war, was replaced with rigid, unrealistic orders. Then came June 6, 1944. The Allies launched D-Day, the invasion of Normandy. It was one of the largest amphibious operations in history. Thousands of ships, aircraft, and troops stormed the beaches of France. Germany had expected an invasion, but not where it happened. Allied deception operations had convinced Hitler that the main attack would come elsewhere. As a result, key German forces were held back. Even as reports came in, Hitler hesitated. He believed it was a diversion. Precious hours were lost. By the time he realized the truth, it was too late. The Allies established a foothold. From there, they pushed inland, liberating France and advancing toward Germany. Now, Germany was being crushed from both east and west. The Soviet Union pushed relentlessly toward Berlin, reclaiming lost territory and driving deep into German lands. Cities fell one by one. The Red Army showed no mercy. Years of brutal war had hardened them. In the West, Allied forces crossed into Germany itself. The once mighty Reich was collapsing. Inside Germany, the situation grew desperate. Fuel shortages crippled the military. Tanks and planes sat idle. Soldiers were undertrained and poorly equipped. Even teenagers and elderly men were drafted into the defense. Hitler's response? Fantasy. He issued orders for counterattacks that could not possibly succeed. He believed in armies that no longer existed. He imagined turning points that would never come. One final gamble came in late 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler launched a surprise offensive in the Ardennes, hoping to split Allied forces and force a negotiated peace. At first, it worked. The attack caught the Allies off guard. German forces pushed forward, but the success was temporary. Allied resistance stiffened. Weather cleared, allowing air support. German fuel shortages became critical. The offensive stalled, then collapsed. It was Germany's last major attempt to change the course of the war. After that, defeat was inevitable. By early 1945, Soviet forces were closing in on Berlin. The city was surrounded. Artillery thundered day and night. Buildings crumbled. Civilians hid in fear. In his bunker, Hitler remained detached from reality. He blamed his generals. He blamed the people. He believed Germany had failed him rather than the other way around. As Soviet troops fought their way into the city, the end came quickly. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler took his own life. Days later, Germany surrendered. So how did Hitler lose World War II? It wasn't one single mistake. It was a chain reaction of decisions, driven by arrogance, ideology, and refusal to accept reality. He underestimated his enemies, especially the Soviet Union. He overextended his forces across vast fronts. He ignored logistical realities. He interfered with military strategy. He refused to adapt. At the same time, his enemies grew stronger. The Soviet Union absorbed devastating losses, but kept fighting. Britain held out against all odds. The United States brought overwhelming industrial power into the war. Germany, once dominant, was eventually outproduced, outmaneuvered, and outlasted. In the end, the downfall wasn't sudden, it was inevitable. Because wars are not won by early victories alone. They are won by strategy, resources, adaptability, and leadership. And in those areas, Hitler ultimately failed. The map in the bunker told the final story. The red pins had closed in. The black ones had spread too far, and the man who once dreamed of ruling the world was left with nothing but the consequences of his own decisions.